Today we're going to talk about power sanders. So I have a spindle sander and a disc sander. We actually have 3 spindle sanders in the class, but just 1 disc sander. But either way, we're going to talk about how to safely use both of these. There will just be 1 safety test for both of these sanders. A few of the parts you're going to need to know on these sanders. This big flat piece is called the table, just like every other big flat surface in here. Same thing right here. This is the table. This is the disc on the disc sander. This piece is called the spindle for the spindle sander. On-off switch for this one is up front. On-off switch for this one is kind of in the back on the side back here. And these pieces are called throat plates. They go on the spindle sander depending upon the size of the spindle that you're going to use. Those are really the only parts on these 2 machines you need to know. They're pretty simple. Some people think you don't have to wear safety glasses when you're using these 2 machines. That, of course, is not true. As soon as you walk in this room, if you're going to do some work or other people are working, you need to have safety glasses on at all times. A lot of people also seem to think that these machines are always safer to use than a machine with blades, for example, like the miter saw or the band saw. While by nature these machines are generally safer, they just have a sanding surface on them and they might not cause as severe injuries. That does not mean they're entirely safe. You could go ahead and use a band saw and use it completely safe and then come over here and accidentally jam your hand into the disc and really scrape up your knuckles. So just because these are safer machines in general doesn't mean they're always safer than the other machines in here. It just depends on how you use it. They can be really dangerous if you don't use them carefully. A big issue a lot of students run into in this class is burning their material. I do take off points for having burn marks on your products, so you really got to be careful not to burn your material. I'll talk a little bit about how not to burn your material as you are working with these machines. One of the best things you can do is to not push your material very hard into the sanding surface, whether it's the disc sander or the spindle sander. You don't want to push very hard. A lot of students seem to think the harder you push, the faster it'll go, when this is usually and almost always definitely not true. You might feel like you're getting more done because you're pushing harder and you're working harder. That doesn't mean these machines are actually going to work any faster. You want to push very gently. The harder you push, the only thing that's really going to happen there is the friction is going to be a lot higher, which when the friction is higher, the heat's going to build faster, and if the heat builds faster, there's a better chance you're going to burn your material. So you don't want to push hard, you just want to push very, very gently. Another thing you want to keep in mind is you always want to keep your project moving. You don't want to hold it in one spot and sand in one spot for too long. So for example, if I was using the disc sander here, I'd want to be moving back and forth constantly like this, not hold it in one spot for too long. Otherwise, I'll have a lot better chance of burning the material. Same thing on the spindle sander. I'd want to be moving my board back and forth like this, not holding it in one spot too long so I don't burn my material. Another issue that comes from holding your material in one spot too long is damaging the sanding surface as well. If you hold your material in one spot too long, not only will it burn your material, but it also can start to ruin the sanding surface. It won't necessarily burn the sanding surface, but as your material burns, it kind of makes a little bit of a resin type stuff that gets stuck in the sanding surface. And once that's stuck in the sanding surface, I can't get it out and ruins the sanding surface. This goes for the spindle sander and the disc sander. So you really got to be careful so you don't ruin the sanding surface. With the disc sander, I only replace the disc once a year, and that's at semester break. So I'll put a new one on at the beginning of the year, and I'll put another new one on at the halfway through the year mark. So you got to be careful not to ruin the disc on here, because I'm not going to put another one on if you guys hold it on there too long in one place and ruin it. You really got to be careful about preserving the disc on the disc sander. Another good thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is always make sure your material is flat on the table. A lot of students seem to want to look at the spindle and go, oh hey, there's cleaner sandpaper up here, so I'm going to hang on to it like this. Or I'm going to hold it at an angle like this. Same thing over here. A lot of students think, well, I got to sand these corners, so I'm going to hang on to it like this or like this. Never a good idea when you're using the power sanders. You always want to make sure your material is flat on the table at all times. You aren't angling it up, you aren't picking it up at all. Always keep it flat on the table. If you don't keep it flat on the table, what's likely to happen is the disc or the spindle might grab onto your material, and if your fingers are between there, it can slam your fingers down into that table, which obviously would not feel real too good. So always make sure you keep it flat on the table at all times. When you are sanding and you have a board like this, never ever do any face sanding. No, that's not when you take your face and jam it onto the sander. That's when you are face sanding a board. A board has three main different parts. There is the edge, which is these pieces right here. There's the corners right here, and then this is called the face. Face sanding would be as if you take your board and put it flat up against the sanding surface just like this. So if your board was a little too thick and you thought, well, I'll just do some face sanding to get it thinner, that's not going to work. It's a bad idea for a lot of reasons. First off, what could happen is you're going to have your fingers really close to the disc. As you can see, the board isn't very thick, so if it's like this, your fingers are not very far away from the disc. So if you slip, you got a good chance of going into it. Secondly, you only can use half of the sander anyway. You can't use the right side of the sander, which I'll explain here in a little bit. So you can't even sand the whole board down anyway because you can't use this side. So you might think, oh, maybe I'll do some face sand on the spindle sander. Well, as you can see, it's not very flat, so you're not going to end with a very flat surface either. Another problem is you're probably going to end up with an angled surface no matter how hard you try. This end will probably be skinnier than this end, or vice versa. It's not going to work. Don't do any face sanding in here. It's not a good idea. If you screwed something up and your board needs to get smaller, but it's too short to run through the planer, let me know. We can get something figured out, but face sanding is never the answer. Let's say your board is about 1/16 of an inch too long. A lot of students seem to think that disc sander is the best way to fix that. So a lot of students will come to the disc sander and try to sand off a little bit extra to make it however long they need it to be. This is a terrible idea for a lot of reasons. First off, you're very, very likely to burn your board when you do this because sanding on the end of the grain can be kind of hard on the board and the disc. Another issue is this is a pretty wide board, and this will be about how wide yours is as well. So you don't have a lot of room to move back and forth, so doing that gets difficult. So it builds pretty good heat really quickly, which means you're going to end up burning your stock most likely. Another reason why you don't want to shorten up your board to using the disc sander is you're not going to get it perfect. It's not going to be 90 degrees because the chance of you holding the board exactly 90 degrees to the sanding surface is very, very unlikely. You might be able to get it close, but it's probably not going to happen. Also, there is a much better machine to use for doing this than the disc sander. The miter saw, for example, is by far the best machine to do this. It's set up for you already. It almost always makes exact 90-degree cuts. It'll be faster, it won't burn your material, and it'll just work out better. Right now, as you can see, I have a very small spindle set up on the spindle sander. The spindles are interchangeable, so I can have a really small one, and I can have a much bigger one, and there's some sizes in between as well. If you are sanding something and you need one of the spindles changed, come and talk to me. Don't try to change it yourself. They're reverse threads. It can get kind of confusing. So if you need the spindle changed, talk to me. Don't try to change them yourself. Reason why changing the spindles is important is because you might have different curves you need to sand. For example, on this outline of this bear that I have here, there's a bigger curve here, there's a smaller curve here, there's different curves you need to sand. A little spindle like this will easily fit in here and might work, but a big spindle like this, you won't be able to get it in there, and it's not as safe. When you have something like this that's this big and a curve this small, it creates high friction points where this comes in contact with this. High friction is generally created, which gives you a lot better chance of having this ripped out of your hand, and obviously that's not a good thing. So always make sure if you need the spindle changed, you talk to me and have it changed. When you're using the disc sander, only use the side that is spinning down. In this case, the disc spins like this, so this is the side that is spinning down. Never use the side that is spinning up. I have seen bad things happen when students try to use the side that spins up. If you use the side that spins down, good things are very likely to happen. The downward motion of the disc will actually take your material and help hold it in place. It'll actually be easier for you to use. If you use the side that spins up, it'll only try to lift up your board. I once saw a student who was trying to sand a long board like this, and he tried jamming it in the wrong side of the disc, and the disc actually grabbed onto that board and it came up and smacked him. It wasn't that bad, so I'm happy he didn't get hurt, but hopefully learned a lesson that day not to use the incorrect side of the disc. Only use the side that is spinning down. That way that doesn't happen. And like I said, it'll be easier for you anyway. Only use the side that spins down. One thing that can happen when using these machines is the sanding surface can get clogged up. You can see this one is getting some material already in it and it's starting to get clogged up a little bit with sawdust. This one is pretty clean, however. If they do get clogged up, come and talk to me. I can clean these surfaces if it is just sawdust. If it starts to get to be like resin, like we talked about before, when your material starts to burn, that I can't clean out of these discs or out of these spindles. But if it is just sawdust that's getting clogged up in there, let me know. I can take this piece of waxy material and put it up against the disc or the spindle and I can clean them out. Doesn't mean I need to do it every 10 minutes or so. That's generally why I don't leave these out, is because I don't want students wasting these, and I don't want students, you know, sanding a little bit and using this sanding, using this back and forth, back and forth. Always make sure you ask me about it. It won't take me very long. Just let me know and I'll get it cleaned up for you. So there are two main things I want you to think about when you're using the power sanders. Always make sure you push very gently into the sanding surface, whether it's the disc sander or the spindle sander. Don't push too hard. The harder you push, the faster your material is going to burn. And also make sure to keep your board moving back and forth. You don't want to hold it in one spot too long. If you got any questions about the power sanders, let me know. I'll be happy to help you.